So good evening. I'm sure we all are going to be in the thrall of these four poets who sit before us. And since the introductions have already been taken care of, let's not waste more time. Before I request each one of the poets to read a bit of their poetry, say 4 to 5 minutes each at the maximum. And then maybe you can read more if you want to once we are having a discussion or a conversation. So, so without much delay, I would request Doris to please read whatever her choice would be for today. And as we know that she's been translated recently into Hindi by Teji Grover and Rustam Singh. और उनकी किताब का हिंदी का जो उन्वान है वो है आग जो जलाती नहीं और अंग्रेज़ी के दो पॉपुलर उनके जो शी इज़ एन एस्टोनियन पोएट जैसे कि आपको अभी बताया तो two of her famous volumes of poetry translated into English are The Shape of Time and The Days of Grace, if I'm not wrong. All right, so over to Doris.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I was asked to read in Estonian because you may not have heard much Estonian in your life. But I'll check whether, yes, you can read the English texts. Kui ma ei kõnele sellest, ma suren. Kui tunnistan seda, see tapab mu. Taevas, mida ma teen? Kui kirjutan, karjatan sõnakuulmatuid sõnu, peaaegu võimatul nõlval vaikuse kuru kõrval. Kui kirjutan, harjutan varjude valitsemist, jahedal randmel, rapiiril, viimse pimeda piiril. Kui kirjutan, kirjutan üleni keeldumuskeeles. Mu ülim pilgar on paast, taevast kaevates maast. Kaotaja kiituseks laulan, sest võitjale lauldakse niigi. Kurva ees kummardan, löödu ees langetan pea. Maailmast loobuja loob, leiab unedes eneseriigi. Tõeluse taluja salajõudu ja suurust keegi ei tea. Kaotaja kiituseks laulan ja ilma oli ja iluks. Põlatu pärgan, ta kõrgele laubale vajutan suu. Sellele, kes suudab selgust puuduvast kogu eluks, kerge ja sirgena kanda, olen ma tuumani truu. Muud ma pole palunud, ei palu. Selget südant, seda palun küll. Tahet taevast endas peegeldada murdliku maailma vastuseks. Anna valgustunde veres, vaimus, et võiks ära tunda oma rada. Anna hinge heldust halastada. Anna jõudu jääda õiglaseks. Mitte midagi ei toimu, ainult tähed tiirlevad ning maailmu tekib, hukkub, pilgub igal sekundil. Nende võbelevad tolmu, valgus rasket laugudele, tajun nagu kauget lõhna lapseeast meil teadsin peast. Jah, see juhtub, Jumal. Juukse juurtest taldadeni läbitstab sind välguvarras, millel keerled keeletu, kosmilises üksiolus, igaveses küsimises, keset tühjust, keset täiust, olemise otsatust. Sosinohkeid, kiljatusi, silmapilgus sonimist, arvad kuulmat ilmaruumi, aimus kauges kuminas, varje, värelusi, jälgi kujutletust, kogetust, kuigi midagi ei toimu. Isegi su sisemuse maagiline sulatuli, voolav, valguv sõnamagma, mitte kuidagi ei tardu lauseks, laulusarnaseks. Mitte midagi ei toimu. Ainult tähed tiirlevad, süda, soolane ja selge, üksi tuksub, tiksub truult. Maailm, las ma lähen maha. Maailm, jah, ma olen möödas. Mitte midagi ei toimu. Ainult tähed tiirlevad, kosmilises üksiolus, igaveses püsimises, keset tühjust, keset täiust, olemise otsatust.
So I hope you guys were able to. Were you reading the English properly? Was it visible? All right. That's right. The voice was pretty mesmerizing. Right. So we move to Ranjit Hoskote, who has many remarkable qualities. I mean, there's no way, I would go on and on. I do want to remark about the fact that he's done a brilliant translation of Lalla, called Lal Det, called I Lalla, for which he won the Sahitya Akademi Award for translation. And so he's a kindred soul. And I will request him to go ahead with reading some poetry for us.
Thank you so much, Baran. And it's marvelous to be back in Jaipur and marvelous to see this vast audience for poetry. You know, I suppose I belong to a generation where if you had 5 people in the audience, you thought you'd really done pretty well for yourself. Also, I haven't heard any Estonian poetry in about 30 years. My flatmate, when I was on the international writing program in Iowa, was the delightfully eccentric Estonian poet Karl Martin Sinierv, but I haven't heard any Estonian since then, so thank you very much, Doris. I'm going to start with a poem called Town. I'm going to read from my book, Hunchprose. Town. In this town, ask for directions in whispers. Tell no one your birth name. Say you're on your way to nightfall. Buy more bread than you'll eat. Read the signboards forwards and back. Mimic the rare songbird hiding in a bush. Stride along the pipeline bridging the creek. Shuffle off the linen strap on the Kevlar. Play infidel on the hill, believer on the beach. Because one blue is so much closer to us than the other. On your knees in the sand, and when it's time, pray you'll come back as pearl thread surf, not driftwood in this town. This one's called Pilgrim. Did I ever think heaven would ripen its doors before their right season, expecting me to arrive any day now, my boots caked with mud, my coat weighed down with rain, my lips moving to sounds not tethered yet to chants, more hostage than pilgrim, telling my story in bursts, how I let rivers surge through the trenches, how a thrown knife pinned me to a farewell, how I shrugged myself loose and ran, a banner rippling in and out of air, my hands burning with colors I'd scrounged off rocks, shrubs, spiky trees on my way here, leaving my palms on outcrop and leaf, my soles on creased water. This one's called Market. Never forget the salt makers. They can trap the sea. Never forget the makers of flint knives. They can split the earth. Never forget the spice sellers. They can tempt the tongue to sing. Never forget the kite makers. They can scissor the wind into streamers. Never forget the carpenters. They can build horses that breach walled cities. Never forget those who stretch hide into leather. They can craft drums that bring down palaces. I'll read one called Hawk. Caught up on the wave of the past, a hawk curls back, ripping the seamed and sutured scar of our passage. Its wings are lined with scripts no one can read, but everyone brawls over. How many people are going to be reading here? I mean, I feel slightly monopolistic of the stage right now, but you know. I'm going to start again. Hawk. Caught up on the wave of the past, a hawk curls back, ripping the seamed and sutured scar of our passage. Its wings are lined with scripts no one can read, but everyone brawls over. In this city of howling dogs and winning saints, the blood that spurts under its claws is common, the sort you could smell anywhere, the sort you can smell everywhere. Suffer us all, dear God of many names, to come together and feed ourselves to that insatiable beak. Thank you. I'll close with one called Sovereign. Plucking sunsets from the water, the horned sovereign half stamps, half slides across the beach, stopping to dig, claw, rake. What washes up is drilled shale, lost static bars from Gulf to Strait, plastic whirls in whose wake gagged dolphins trail scarred humpback whales whose shadows will drift unmoored up thawing glaciers. What washes up is news of the cracked ice across which a shivering fox is making her way from Svalbard to Nunavut, leaving her paw prints on frozen currents to a shore stippled with burst nebulae, a shore that on a compass dizzy with wind-scattered directions she can and can't call home. Thank you for your attention.
Wow, so you've left us craving for more. So hopefully we'll get to hear some more of your poetry in a short while. So now we look at Deepti Naval, our very own Deepti, whom all of us want to own for various reasons. And she's her latest collection of poetry is in English, Black Wind, और all right, और इनका पहला जो कलेक्शन था वो मेरे ख्याल से हिंदी का था जी, आप बताएं उसके बारे में भी, उसका नाम, और उसमें हिंदी से इंग्लिश भी स्विच किया है, वो बाद में बात करेंगे, आप सुनाइए.
Thank you. I'm going to read, the first book was called Lamha Lamha. That was Lamha Lamha, that was Hindi. Hindustani, I would say. Urdu Hindi mix, jo north mein hota hai. Then after that one book, I couldn't go back to writing in Urdu, Hindustani, because I thought, when you want to say the harsher things of life, you kind of get away with saying it in English. It's kind of easier to say it and not sound too heavy duty.
Agree.
Yeah, so this work, Black Wind, happened during the early 90s. And I had The first poem that I'm going to read is called Goddess. I went to a mental institution, stayed in the women's ward. I was working on a script, and I was writing a script. So I was there. I went for a few days, 2-3 days, I thought, but I ended up staying 23 days because of the way I came to understand the women, the way I got involved and wanted to know more and more about the women. So one such girl I'm going to read about. I'm Durga. I'm Durga, I'm Kali, the goddess. No one can conquer me. She pulled the crown off the idol's head and wore it on herself. The crowds were aghast. They swore at her, chased her with sticks, stones, screams, but she slipped into the wilds, flying beyond their reach. At the magic hour when the sun and rain dazzled the earth, she danced and skipped, jumped and leaped, chasing a single rainbow. Light-footed she glided the celestial landscape, wearing her cheap silver crown. She tripped the light luminous. I'm Durga, I'm Kali. A frog leapt in the slush. She lunged towards it, caught it. Croaky frog twitching in her left hand, stick in the right, a tinsel crown aslant her forehead. She was one with the elements. With earth, with sky, with slush, with trees, with breeze, dancing, mesmerizing her gods. Her laughter gurgled in the wind, her feet spinning the good earth. And then the villagers got her. Then the villagers got her, caught her by her feet, dragged her through the slush. Frog stick crown dragged behind, straggled on the muddy track. She's too dangerous to be left free. They signed on a piece of paper, dumped her in the loony bin, wiped the vermilion off her forehead, chopped the long black hair, raised it to scalp, locked her behind the solid grill, left her squalling on the cold, dank floor. Now when the sky is overcast and the earth is wet and brown, she walks down the courtyard, blue-templed and dead-eyed. The cardboard crown trails behind her. None make a sound. Thank you. Thank you. There's time, right? Read some more.
Please read another one.
My baby glows a glassy blue, like fish on dark rocks at sea. My baby glows a glassy blue, like fish on dark rocks at sea. On moonless nights when the tide is low, I come and sit on this hillside, gazing at the ocean, this endless deep, filling my breath with cold, damp earth. A coldness and dampness that seeps through my skin like unreal experience. The sensation of a small, chilled body placed on a stiff thigh. I freeze even in retrospect. Hold my hand, will you? Hold my hand, will you? Stay close, don't go. No, we won't get into this, not now. We'll drive these images away, rake them out from corroded interiors of the mind, set them free on the wind, and start again somewhere. Somewhere here, somewhere now. This midnight, this perfect gray moment, this moonless reality of being alive. Alive and together on this wind-blown hill, sharing the fleeting light, making eternal these moments, freezing them in memory. Down by the sea in the distance lie amazing on dark rocks, brilliant streaks of light, tiny silver blue living beings, perfectly dead, yet glowing. Thank you. On the brink of a winter fog, Assyrian women mourners, shrouded in black, fling sudden white hands to sky, dancing in their inner squares. Soft, hard, and liquid contours gather their pale feet, wailing on the inside, beating their breasts to silent drums. Drums which later will beat loud and wild in the empty room of my solitude. I will then go join them in their lamenting, beat with them my blues and find my unchalked squares in the green night. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepti. That was so enriching. So we are waiting to hear Siddharth now, Siddharth Dasgupta, I think the youngest poet today, with us today. And he's going to be reading from his latest collection, All These Streets We've Loved, We've Known by Heart. Just wanted to add this about him, that his poetry is, it has these phrases which kind of surprise and shock you, and and he draws your attention, he catches your attention, mostly to pictures which he would like to, images or pictures or the external. One of the lines that I loved about his, from his poems was, I've loved the sea more than I've ever loved you. Does it go like that?
That's a story for another time.
Oh, that's a story? All right, because I saw that quoted many times.
But that's how it goes, you're right.
All right, all right. So here goes.
Hello. I'm going to be speaking from all these streets we've known by heart, and from elsewhere too. I realize this is a gathering of poetry, but it still needs to be asked, are there any poetry lovers in the audience? By way of a socio-cultural experiment, are there any Shah Rukh Khan lovers in the audience? I think that was a bit louder, but the joke's on you because this is a poem about Shah Rukh Khan. I see God in the strangest places. Like the point on Manikji Mehta Road, where the pole from the scaffolding of leftover earth meets the truant branch of a nearby banyan tree, their union resulting in the birth of a cross that rests there, oblivious to the municipality, since God loves one and all. Or the tattered insides of a rickshaw-painted garish, with the devoutly Hindu driver proudly having pasted a poster of an impossibly haired Hindi film actor staring into the myth of an impossible dream, and the one line that weaves India, Bharat, faith, and deliverance into the one impossible parable, Shah Rukh Khan is God. I suppose the only place I don't see God is in the temple, within the stained glass stillnesses of a rousing mosque, within the antiquated romance of a Sunday mass. I see beauty here, perfectly portioned, faithfully rationed, but I don't see God. For God, I roam the private geographies of a city. I drop into the afternoon ennui of a bakery or two. I have cloud formations and the fractals of damaged light. I have my body, the cartography of its marks, the typography of its heart, its arms, its other terrific loyalists, and yes, I have Shah Rukh Khan. It may not seem like it, but the next poem is a love letter to Bombay. As you can see, I'm very well prepared. Wonderment in apartment 703. The day has broken expectedly, like a ligament previously kept alive, only by sorrow. And sure, climate change is not an actual thing, haha, but it's touching 40 in March. And the morons have stopped being funny light years ago. I wonder which cities will burn and which cities will drown, the prevailing existential famish of our urban erosions. The constant wonderment of famished pilgrims, a starfish carrying 5 dreams, each dream carrying a different end to the world. The promise in these parts is you dab namak on a wound, the wound heals twice as quick. But how much salt could there be left in this world? There are ways in which the world will break you. This is not a song of grief, but of life, which is to say, this is a song of heartbeats, a tribal disco that belongs to the days of soil, leaf, flame, and ether. I crack open an egg, whisk its honeyed yolk, until it bleeds into the remains of the easily breakable day. I'm about to reach for the salt when I remember and pull away. Somewhere I can hear jacaranda falling on earth. Somewhere things aren't that easily forgotten. A mosque fills the air. A cat cries over spilt milk. Children spill into leftover portions of a cracked sidewalk. The promise in these parts is anything broken can and should be made whole again. In all these streets we've known by heart, there is a 3-poem suite about Mahatma Gandhi called A Map of Mahatma Gandhi. And this is part 1 of that suite. It's called Thursday. Is there a lot of chatter, or is that just the voices in my head? But stay quiet then. Thursday. On Mahatma Gandhi Road, I find no Gandhi. I find a statue, though, adulated by pigeons and other flights of belonging. I find Parsis, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, and Catholics. Perhaps that's the same thing as finding Gandhi. Ambling across one in a muddle of arterial breakaways over at the Old Victory, even new films come frozen in the Art Deco filigree of a faraway yesterday. Cinema, cinema, a young lad yells, as though whisked away via a timeless improbability. But mind you, still no Gandhi. Biscuits imbued with wine and cakes birthed through the rich fulsomeness of thickened milk make for an extravagant breakfast, agreed. But this is Pune and this is Kayani, and some things tend to go together as the sown through providence. Savoring the crumbling heritage, the thought lingers still. Kahan hai Gandhi? The shoeshine man near the signal on Sacha Peer has old Hindi film songs on his mind. He hums mindlessly, something about a head masseurs having the answers to life, be it swirling head or sinking heart. I listen, I peer, this street and its elect phrases, but here, no Gandhi. A sip of chai and the world tastes better. This guy's tailor has seen better days. I'm sure, so has he. I scan its battered paint and sunken eyes, coming upon the lines, chai, coffee, drinks, and snack, singular. Akash Gandhi Tea Empire. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. That was a real pleasure. So we are left with a bit of time for some discussion. Just for starters, I have a couple of things in mind which I just float amongst you, and you're free to take it. Any one of you can begin. One would be, since all of you are writing, I mean, there is a kind of distinct tone to each one's poetry, which doesn't mean that there is nothing common, But would you like to talk about a certain tradition to which you can identify, or which you have in mind, or which you can connect to when you write your poems? And what do you think poetry is all about? So when this act of writing a poem, and the idea of tradition, or maybe even convention. So here's to anybody who would like to speak first.
Estonian poetry tradition has been strongly carried by women. That's because during centuries, men were fighting, fishing, working, but while women were together in a dimly lighted room, they told each other stories and they sang together or alone. And from those rhythms and alliteration particularly, Estonian tradition of poetry is strongly influenced. And also world classics. So nowadays, Estonian poetry is like swinging from the old roots and musicality towards modern intonations and bitterness.
So do you like to think that your poetry follows a kind of tradition, or if not tradition, but a stream initiated by women? Women singing, women coming together, doing folk singing. So you as a poet identify with some kind of a women's tradition? If that is so, it's great.
No, I don't.
No, you don't?
That's what critics say.
Okay. But you don't look at yourself like that. I mean,
no,
so
I think writing is communication. Like Emily Dickinson wrote Letter to the World. Each poet, in a way, writes a letter to the world.
So you would like to say that kind of you're writing in isolation and talking to your audience when you write? I mean, as in,
yes.
Or do you identify with a certain peer group or a past or a legacy? Something with maybe Ranjit also has something to say about?
Yeah, I mean, am I audible? Can you hear me? For me, tradition is always a collage. I think too many of us labor under the idea that tradition is something continuous and self-consistent that comes down to you, but we all make our own traditions. Mm-hmm. And for me, particularly, increasingly, it has to do with being a multilingual reader who happens to be a monolingual writer. I might write in one language, but that writing is nourished by what I read across other languages, which could be Urdu, which could be German, which could be French. And so to me, translation is an essential part of my poetic practice. And the tradition that I create for myself draws heavily on acts of translation.
So you are drawing from a polyphonic tradition, you would say. So to say, well, that is exactly what I too would, I mean, most of us understand that tradition is not a singular, linear kind of a thing, but it can be anything, with which we identify or we feel kind of authorized, if not, maybe authorized is a too strong a word, but we do feel that there can be a kind of a secret communication between the past and the poet. So I think translation really has a role to play. And the poet is translating all the time, I guess. So that's very well taken, Ranjit. So I wonder if Deepti has anything to add to that.
I don't know about tradition, but I do know that, there are many influences. Whether it's from Hindi film songs, from the early days to, all the English poets that we have read. And I think for me, if there is a streak of tradition, I'm not aware of it. I really don't know. But all I know is that there is, like you said, a collage,
Obviously.
It's a collage, I think, of images, influences, words. especially images. I'm a very visual writer. So for me, it's a lot to do with that.
Yeah,
But
because
I'm
nobody
not
can
aware.
write in a vacuum. Obviously,
Yeah.
as you're saying,
Yeah.
that you are surrounded by voices all around,
Yes,
and but you see, the word influence can be a little dangerous sometimes, because some of us would like to escape influence and kind of sound very, very, very creative and, very new. But then the anxiety of influence is always there, and it works both ways.
It is there. Like today now, if I'm hearing him, I'm hearing all of them, something I'm going to retain, no?
True,
And
true.
so when I go, that becomes part of me. I have retained it, so I've owned it. And
Yeah.
you're not consciously using that,
Right.
but it becomes part of your experience. If you've been touched by something, it becomes your experience.
No doubt.
So somewhere कहीं ना कहीं आपके काम में निकलता है, दिखता है.
जी बिल्कुल. तो इसीलिए तो कहते हैं कि संगत का असर होता है, और आपके ज़माने का, जिस ज़माने में आप जी रहे हैं, सांस ले रहे हैं, वो तो आप उससे बच ही नहीं सकते. सिद्धार्थ, आप ज़रूर, आपके पास समथिंग टू से श्योर ऑन दिस, आई एम श्योर.
I think it's a combination of what everyone's spoken about. The people, for me, it's the people I've read really who've ended up becoming my personal private tradition. I mean, people like Ranjit, and like if you take Ranjit and if you take his two previous collections, Hunchprose and Jonahwhale, they're such a strong part of my personal tradition, because it's also your tradition also becomes what you choose to discard, what you choose not to read, and for a reason, and the ones who you do read, and the ones who it sort of becomes a cultural melange, it becomes a historical footprint, and then that's your archive as you travel through the world.
Yeah, so there are, I know, I for myself would say that, I try deliberately avoiding certain influences, and I end up being very much like them later on, without realizing it, because that influence may have influenced me not so negatively as I thought, and I'm able to deal with it ultimately, and I guess, but in your case as well as in Ranjit's, the choice of writing poetry in English is also a choice which might have come naturally to you, I guess, but at some point in your writing career, in your poetic career, you might have sat down and thought, okay, why did I choose to write in English? So that is also a question that maybe, all of us, the multilinguality and the polyphony and all that notwithstanding, the difficulty of choice for us as Indians. Anything you would like to say to that?
Difficulty, yes, but also a certain liberation as well, because I would still like to think that this is still a country where you might be able to choose your language, I know that might be a fancy sort of notion in the here and now.
आप शाहरुख खान को खुदा कह रहे हैं, अभी तो आज बेचारा इतना बिलीगर्ड है, तो अभी तक आप उसको खुदा सोच रहे हैं, तो फिर आपके पास चॉइस है ज़बान चूज करने.
But also I do feel that you're never really writing in just one language. If you're an Indian poet writing in English, like for me, Hindi creeps in invariably. It might not come onto the page. It might be in my head. And same with Urdu. It might come occasionally, and at other times it may choose not to arrive. But it might be in my mind when I'm thinking of the poem, Yeah.
अब मेरे ख्याल से तो हिंदी और उर्दू हिंदुस्तानी वाला जो मामला है, तो जो ओरिजिनली जो ज़बान थी खड़ी बोली और जो ज़्यादातर बोलते थे यहाँ के, इसको ज़बान क़िले उर्दू मुअल्ला कहा जाता था, तो इसका असल नाम तो हिंदवी था. तो इसलिए हिंदी उर्दू तो बस सब बहनें वहनें हैं, और बिल्कुल सगी बहनें हैं, और सगी बहनों से भी ज़्यादा शायद एक दूसरे के पेट में बैठी हुई हैं. सो वी डोंट नीड टू रियली डिस्टिंग्विश बिटवीन द टू, एक्सेप्ट फॉर deliberate sanskritized versions or deliberately Persianized versions of our own language. Urdu तो हमारी अपनी ज़बान है. So if there are questions in the audience, then we have 10 minutes to go, and so I would request you to raise your hands in order of, okay. So I think this gentleman here raised his hand first, and so would you please pass the mic to him? Please keep your questions brief so that we can have more questions.
Yeah, my question has arisen from the discussions you were having. You see, there was a line from Doris' poem, even your inmost magic molten fire, fluid trickling word magma, refuses to harden into a song like lime. What I want to say is, everybody here is a poet somewhere. A part of him or her is a poet. But they don't know many times how to express. They can't articulate. And that is why they are here to listen to people.
So you want to extend your appreciation to her?
It's an appreciation at the same time. It's an addition to the discussion we were having that you people are able to articulate. Language doesn't matter. Whatever language. Now, I can say, write in English, Hindi. Deepti has written in Hindi also. And Hindustani.
So poets are wordsmiths, you know.
So I think you will agree with me as poets that the expression which is trickling in everybody's heart, like a word here or a word there, or maybe a forbidden word, as you said, as Deepti mentioned, which you can't mention, or some forbidden act, which comes out as expression from a poet, and therefore you run after the poems. You read a book.
भाई इतना आसान नहीं है. I think, you know, let's give the poets their due. They work very hard. And they read.
Do you agree with me? I mean,
yeah. So as you know, probably on her behalf, I would say you saying that she's given a voice to your you know, ideas or your sentiments. So I think, so let's give her a big hand for that.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. So there is a question which I think Susmita sitting in the third row would like to ask. She raised her hand initially. Ma'am, after her. Yeah.
My question is addressed to Mr. Hoskote, whose poetry I greatly admire. So here's the thing. In fact, my question is at variance with what the gentleman just said.
Keep the mic closer to your...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a huge admirer of poetry, and I have, this brings me often into very violent discussions with my friends, because people sort of try to thrust poetry upon you, and it looks like, you know, sort of diaries written where, you know, at random points people have placed here this line ends and the next begins. They just sort of put commas and they put it down like that, and then they say this is poetry. So I think it's like neurobiology or something. I mean, like a very refined science. People know that they don't know it. Somebody who is not an astrophysicist knows that he is not. But everybody thinks they can be a poet because language is accessible to all. But I think poetry is something different. And I have tried very hard to engage with this question. I have tried to understand what sets poetry aside from non-poetry. I have, to my mind, come across maybe it's something about structure. And I think maybe it's to do with resonance, like words resonate more in poetry than in other things. But I would like Mr. Hoskote, who, as I said, I greatly admire, to tell me how to
I think all of us admire him.
How to distinguish, or at least, I mean, you know, in my heart I can distinguish between poetry and non-poetry. But how to explain it to the, 25-year-old?
Actually, yeah, poetry is saving the day because literary and non-literary is now, it's blurred completely. The boundaries they've been done away with. So Ranjit will answer.
What is poetry? How do you distinguish between good and bad poetry?
Don't challenge him so much. That's
Ranjit, please tell us.
This is a subject for a series of lectures. No, but listen, I'm just going to speak as an artisan, which is all I am. For me, it has to do with craft. It's not a popular word. But the fact is that whilst all of us do have language and we have emotions and we have things that seem to exceed our current linguistic abilities, I think as poets, what we try to do is to pursue that to a point where it is given some kind of shape. And that comes out of, honestly, you talked about tradition, Baran, earlier. It comes from a long apprenticeship to a tradition. So whilst it might seem that inspiration is a marvelous thing, the fact is that you're responding to this through your apprenticeship to craft, to tradition, to forms of vision. And you're looking for something that resonates, that has multiple meanings, and that can be read in terms of leaving a surplus behind. I mean, it's not completed until the reader reads it.
So, like these days, you know, there's this phrase which youngsters use. My daughter says it often to me, do you hear yourself? So she says, do you hear yourself? So, you know, this is something which probably is like the touchstone method or something you were referring to, but it's, yes, there are so many questions, so yes, it's your turn now, ma'am.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I wanted to know something, is that
And
obviously
time is short. We have 5 minutes more or
Namaskar.
5?
Oh, I wanted to know something. We are in a country where there is the mushera. The mushera
तो
is...
माइक दे दिया आपने, एक को दीजिए.
Sorry.
अच्छा, आप बैठ जाएं, sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to know it. In the country where we have a mushera and we actually hear poetry being spoken and sung or in Tarannum, I wanted to know whether there was a big disadvantage for people to read poetry because they don't hear the tone of the poet. How do you compensate for poetry on paper and poetry that's heard?
Whom is your question addressed to?
To whoever wants to answer.
All right, Siddharth, would you like to answer?
How do you compensate for it?
She's saying कि oral tradition आपके यहाँ ज़्यादा है.
Yeah. I do feel this comes from a personal point of view, and perhaps it can go beyond just me. I found that if something is true, and if something strikes a chord when you hear it spoken, it would have to have struck a chord on the page as well. Like there's very rarely something that's quite a mediocre poem on page, but is suddenly, transformed into a terrific poem when spoken out. That just doesn't happen. So to me, the page is such a beautiful, sacred, resonant, textured medium. And often I feel the page, because you're making up that voice, as you read, it sort of supersedes even, poetry being spoken. Though there's so much beauty to poetry being spoken as well.
All right, so we'll quickly take your question now.
नमस्कार मैम, मेरा क्वेश्चन दीप्ति मैम से है. एक्सप्रेशन सभी के लिए ज़रूरी है और मैच्योर इमेच्योर ट्रेडिशनल और जैसा भी होता है वो किया जाता है. बहुत कम लोगों को एक्सप्रेशन का मौका मिलता है, अपने आप को एक्सप्रेस कर पाते हैं, वो भी जो दूसरों के लिए इंस्पिरेशन बने. मैम, आप आर्टिस्ट हैं, आप एक्टिंग करते हैं, आप लिखते हैं, आप पेंटिंग करते हैं, मतलब आपके पास इतने सारे एक्सप्रेशंस के वे आउट्स हैं. आप सबसे ज़्यादा, मेरी 2 क्वेरीज हैं कि आप सबसे ज़्यादा कंफर्टेबल कहाँ फील करते हैं, और दूसरा ये है कि ये आपको एज़ पर योर, जैसा आपने कहा कि आप इमेजेस से, इमेजरी से ही अपने आप को एक्सप्रेस करते हैं, तो कहाँ आप अपने आप को ज़्यादा कंफर्टेबल फील करते हैं, कहाँ आप अपने करीब होते हैं इन फॉर्म्स में?
इमेजरी से ही नहीं, थॉट is the most important.
She means
thing.
which form?
तो
Painting में या
मतलब
शायरी में?
कौन सा मीडियम में मैं ज़्यादा, मुझे लगता है कि जैसे एक्टिंग जब मैं करती हूँ तो किसी और की बात कहती हूँ मैं, डायरेक्टर की है, राइटर की है, फिर एडिटर उसको कुछ और भी बना सकता है कहीं, तो दैट इज़ नॉट व्हाट आई हैव टू से. So I can say it when I paint a canvas or mostly when I write. मैं अपने मन की बात, मैं अपनी बात कह सकती हूँ लिख के. वो किसी भी रोल में आज तक नहीं आई. किसी भी रोल में कोई ऐसा रोल नहीं है जो मैं कह सकूं कि हाँ ये this is who I am. Maybe Panchvati is a film which is very close to, or maybe
So it
Leela,
means poetry
but
any day.
एक दो, बाकी तो it's all only
Poetry.
only through writing. Poetry हो, prose हो, जो भी हो. Only through writing can I say what my take on life is.
Thank you, Deepti. So we'll take one last question and all, वो भी 1 ही मिनट का ना. तो आप किसके पास माइक जल्दी से पहुंचेगा, बस उसी को दे दीजिए. छोटा सा सवाल, हाँ?
Can you hear me? So it could could be for any of you. There was a time when poetry did not resonate to me because what I felt popular poetry was about women and their beauty. And I just felt there is a repetition. And that is the point when my daughter told me, if you're not liking poetry, you're not reading poetry that you actually like. And that's when I searched for feminist poetry and I started reading. That's the point I started actually enjoying poetry. So my question is there any kind of poetry that resonates particularly with you or does not resonate particularly with you?
To whom is it addressed?
It could be any of the
Kisi se bhi?
Yeah.
Okay. Any
Madam
particular kind of poetry that resonates more with you?
It takes a lecture, sorry.
But what's your favorite kind of poetry?
Magic.
Magic? So, I don't think I'm allowed to go any further, although there's this very impatient hand looking at me all the time. So, if I'm allowed, otherwise we can stop. हाँ? ले ली भाई दे दीजिए उनको आप माइक जल्दी से छोटा सा सवाल पूछिएगा लंबा नहीं कोई तमहीद मत बांधिएगा.
Deepti ma'am, with all due respect, your voice is so soothing that if you were to speak at my funeral, I might come alive again.
Let's try it out, huh?
Thank you.
So ma'am, my question is in a more generalized form. Ma'am, जब आप किसी भी art form को express करते हैं, आप तीनों से है, and sorry ma'am, I'm stating it in Hindi. मैम जब आप किसी भी आर्ट फॉर्म को एड्रेस करते हैं वो आपसे स्ट्रांगली स्पीक करता है तो देन मतलब एक स्ट्रांग इन्फ्लुएंस देता है आपके ऊपर तभी आप उसको उतार रहे हैं या आप एक्ट कर रहे हैं वगैरह टाइप चीज़. तो जब आप उसको एक्सप्रेस कर देते हैं तो एक एग्जॉशन क्रिएट हो जाता है. यू बिकम एम्प्टी ऑफ सॉर्ट्स एंड चीज़ें absurd लगने लग जाती है कि हाउ डू आई कैरी ऑन अगेन. सो माई क्वेश्चन इज मैम कि आप उस सिचुएशन में हाउ आर यू ब्रेव टू embrace the uncertainty जो आगे आने वाली है.
I don't know, when you are able to put a thought down, when you're able to express yourself, it liberates you, no? You are free of that. You can move. You can move on. Otherwise, you could be loaded with feelings and images and thoughts and till you have said it. You're carrying the load of that.
So it's a victory. Yeah. It's a victory.
It
not a loss.
To me, I feel freer.
But ma'am, I think the more you write, the more you realize the lesser you know, right?
Let's not get into discussion now.
वो तो होगा ही. वो तो होगा ही.
All right. So thank you so much. That was a lovely audience.